So picking up in verse 11, this is First Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11. Paul goes on to say, "For who knows the thoughts of a man except the man's spirit within him?" And that's a rhetorical question, but he's right. He's just like we know what we think, but we tend to keep our thoughts, if we're smart, to ourselves. In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. We have received, and I'm skipping words here, because I'm just hitting the parts that really speak to me. We have received the Spirit who is from God. So no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God, and we have received the Spirit who is from God. And then Paul says, and we have received this Spirit so that we may understand what God has freely given to us. So God's secret hidden wisdom comes to us through his Holy Spirit. He is our Bible teacher, our Bible preacher. He is our guide. Um, he is our counselor. These are the things that Christ said um, we would receive through the Spirit when he came. In fact, there's an interesting comment that Jesus makes in the upper. I think it's in the upper room when he's talking to his disciples, and he says, "I've got so much on my mind. I've got so much I want to tell you guys, but I can't. I can't because you're not ready to hear it. You can't handle what I'm getting ready to tell you, what I'd love to tell you." And that I don't know, that to me that just kind of blows me away, that there is so much more that Jesus wants us to know about him and about the Father. And I don't know what he wants all of it is, but there's a lot he wants to share with us. And if you're a teacher or communicator, you understand this. There's an awful lot of as a writer, there's an awful lot we put on the page that gets cut later, but there's a lot we want to say. And anyway, he is saying here that Christ is our teacher and our guide and our counselor. And if we just rely on his Holy Spirit, he will reveal to us these deep hidden secrets that the Father wants us to know. Spirit of Jesus knows God's thought. So then Paul goes on and says, we we speak words taught by the Spirit. And I think this is key for anybody who's in the business of communicating the truth of the gospel, to only speak the words taught by the Spirit. And that's back to the writing part. That's where the editing comes in as a communicator. Because we speak spiritual truths in spiritual words. And I'm just going to kind of pause here and focus on the actions that we're kind of declared to take. These are maybe, I'm not necessarily going to call it a command, but certainly instructions to only teach the words that come from the Spirit and only express spiritual truths with spiritual words. And I don't understand all that Paul is saying here, but it does seem to me that when it comes to expressing the gospel, um, the good news of Jesus, that what he's hitting at is, first we need to be in the Spirit and then use spiritual words, whatever those spiritual words are. In other words, only the words that come from the Spirit of Christ, which is, um, at least for me, that's a rare thing. I tend to want to jump right in and speak the first thought I have. But I'm reminded of how Jesus seemed to go about, and when people would ask him a question, I have to believe he spent time pausing and thinking before he answered, because he usually answered in such a way that caught people off balance. They would ask him a question, and rather answering it directly. In fact, I was thinking about this yesterday. They would ask Jesus a question. I think in the he was in the house of a sinner. I mean, he was either in a house of a sinner, or it might have been the occasion where the woman was uh, weeping over his feet and drying his feet with her hair. And um, Jesus' response wasn't to the person that asked him the question. His response was to someone sitting beside him. And like I said, I may not have the story exactly right, but what I saw yesterday when I was thinking about this was someone asked Jesus a question, and Jesus almost turned around and said, "Peter, who do people pay taxes to?" In other words, he ignored the person that asked him the question. Jesus ignored the person that asked him the question. He turned around and just asked one of his disciples a question. Jesus did, because he knew that the response to the individual asking the questions was just going to be combative. It was just going to be an argument. So he just skipped that completely and went on to the next higher level. And I'm sure I'm not explaining this well, but I think that's what Paul is talking about here, that we need to take a breath, listen to the Spirit, and answer with spiritual words. And if we do that, then we will be edifying the individual and speaking truth through the Spirit to that individual. This section ends with section, I mean, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, the end of the chapter ends with, we have the mind of Christ. We have the mind of Christ. Now, there's a lot that goes with that saying, but at least one of the things that goes with that saying is that if we are speaking words taught by the Spirit, if we are expressing spiritual truths with spiritual words, and we have the mind of Christ, then when we speak words of life over someone from the Spirit, then we are doing what Jesus did when he was here on earth. When someone came to Jesus and they said, my child is sick and dying, and Jesus would look at them and go, you can go home now. She's healed. That is my understanding of what Paul is saying here, that we have the mind of Christ, we have words taught by the Spirit, we express these spiritual truths in spiritual words. Like I said, there's a whole lot here, but at the very minimum, that is one of the rich revelations that comes through chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians.